Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
With the start of the NHL season just around the corner, Carolina Hurricanes fans are wondering, how will the Canes do this year? You know, the Canes have made the playoffs 6 straight seasons, but this off-season for the Canes was tough. Several top players moved on, and this is a decidedly different-looking team. In particular, the Canes lost some top defensemen. Brady Skjei, Brent Pesce, and Tony DeAngelo have all moved on. They did add some help with Sean Walker and Shayne Gostisbehere. But the general feeling is this Canes D-core is not as good as last year. You know, at the start of last season, the Athletic put together their list of top defense cores in the league, and at the top, the Carolina Hurricanes. Number 2, Colorado. Number 3, the Vegas Golden Knights. I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at this new-look defense core, compare them to last year's D-core on the Canes, and compare them to the top D-cores around the league. And joining me once again, Storm Tracker insiders Aaron Manning and Katie Bartlett. Well, you know, a lot of folks are looking at the Hurricanes defense this year, and they're kind of concerned, I guess, losing some key players in the offseason. Of course, Brady Skjei and Brent Pesce and Tony DeAngelo, who filled in nicely in the playoffs, all gone. And they're wondering how the Canes are going to fill these positions, number one, and how are they going to stack up against the other teams. And I thought today we'd talk a little bit about that, take a look at how we see the lineup coming together and who we think are going to be the players or player that will really jump forward this year. You know, a lot of folks have penned a lineup a certain way. They seem to think it's going to go as Daily Faceoff has put it together. Of course, that's with Brent Burns and Jacob Slavin together again. They have Dmitry Orlov with Sean Walker, and they have, of course, Shayne Gostisbehere back with Jalen Chatfield. Those guys were together briefly when Ghost was here previously. In any case, that's what folks are saying for the D. What do we think? Katie?
Well, I definitely think that when you look at the breakdown of who they have, 3 left-handed defensemen, 3 right-handed defensemen, and some of the concerns from last season, the best way to go is actually to break up Slavin and Burns. Burns needs to be protected in his minutes a little bit more. He's not quite able to keep up with Slavin when it comes to taking those big high-end matchups. And so in order to keep the left-right pairings good, I'm proposing that we have a first pair of Jacob Slavin and Sean Walker.
Okay.
And then that would leave as a second pairing, stepping up with the departure of Brady Skjei and Brent Pesce. Go ahead and let Orlov and Chatfield take over those minutes. They had to in the playoffs this last year when Pesce was out, and DeAngelo stepped in with Skjei. Because of the reality of not having as much experience together, Orlov and Chatfield took the second line minutes, and Skjei and DeAngelo took the third line minutes. And Orlov and Chatfield were fantastic in that role. So they are the pair that should be kept together and not broken up. They found great chemistry together, and they are ready for those added responsibilities of being the second line. And then that leaves Shayne Gostisbehere and Brent Burns for a third pair, which is a super strong third pair. Lots of offense driving transition game, and yet still has enough size and toughness in the corner to not be giving up too much in their own zone.
Well, that's certainly a bold discussion, because not too many folks have considered taking Brent Burns from his partnership with Slavin and then putting him back on the third pairing. That's interesting. for sure. A couple of things on that. Of course, Burns has seen his playing time declining, and this is not a surprise. Just a couple of years ago in 21-22, he had his highest year of playing time at 26.08. But last year was his lowest in 10 years at 21.30. So you can see that the team is starting to understand that, they need to manage his minutes a little bit better. And I think your plan to put him on that third pairing is definitely a good one. In our recent discussion about the power play, we had also postured that Shayne Gostisbehere would run the first power play, which again would help in managing Burns' minutes. So I think there's definitely something here that we can talk about. But you've also got Walker with Slavin. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, well, again, Walker is a right-handed D. He is very speedy for a defenseman. He's great in the transition game, and he loves to be a part of the rush up the ice. He will take the puck, he will carry it out of the zone, or he'll do a breakout pass, but he doesn't just stop there finding the nearest forward. He will be a part of that zone entry, and he likes to get in and find pockets and create offense that way. The one place that he got in trouble in last year with Philadelphia and Colorado is sometimes he got a little too overzealous with pinching in or getting too deep in the zone, and he'd get caught.
Yeah.
And he was paired with defensemen that weren't able to back him up too well. But by putting him with Slavin, that opens up a whole lot more freedom for him to be creative, to create offense with whichever forward line is out there, because Slavin is not going to be as weak defensively, not by a long shot,
right,
as a lot of the players that Walker was playing with. So Slavin will be there to break up 2-on-1s. He'll be there to prevent the other team from chipping the puck past him on the blue line to go the other direction. He will hold the fort, as it were, and that kind of security can only improve Walker's game. And the Carolina Hurricanes are a team whose offense starts with their defense. And so if you give Walker a chance to create offense, it is going to do wonders, not just for the team, but for the forward core as well, because they will have that sort of extra forward with them in the zone that they can use and find open. Walker's also great that if the Canes are forechecking and they're cycling the puck down low, he will find those soft spots in between the circles or up high down the middle, where those forwards, we have great passing skills on our forward core. They will find him. They will have the vision to find him, and he will just eat all season long from those soft spots that he can find.
Well, Walker, just a couple of comments. I think you're dead on, Katie, in this one. Walker, when he was with Philadelphia in particular, and that's where he really started to, I think, take the next level. He played over 19 minutes a game, 1935 a game. He was +9 with Philadelphia. And, the Flyers were kind of, they were building a new team there. So I think that's a strong performance. He was relied on in all situations. Eric Tulsky, when he signed him, basically said that's exactly what it is. He can play in all situations at a high level. So, he's the number one thing for the Canes D. They got to be able to skate, and he can definitely skate. So I think you're right on. If you talk about Slavin, interesting stat on Slavin was that in the last 5 years, he's third among defensemen in the NHL for plus-minus at a 126. So that just shows you. And, he was outstanding with Tony DeAngelo, and Tony was +35 with him. So, you've got some really incredible reference points for the defensive acumen of Slavin. In fact, there was a recent piece done by the NHL Network on the top defenseman, if you saw it there, and number 13 was Jacob Slavin. And that was really based on his defensive acumen, as you know. And a lot of other folks did a likewise similar kind of thing on D players. ESPN had him at number 8. Sports Illustrated had him at 10. A lot of folks see Slavin as one of the elite defensemen in the National Hockey League. And he can play with anybody, as you've said. He's just capable of jumping in and getting it done with any defenseman that the Kings want to put him with. And even Burns, who, at different times was not as concerned defensively. Once again, strong performance by Slavin, who had another big year in the plus-minus last year. So he can play with anybody.
And I would just like to jump in and add that one thing that would be really nice about a Walker and Slavin pairing is that Slavin and Burns are kind of similar when it comes to certain elements of the physicality of the play. Slavin had 55 hits last year and Burns had 41. Nobody expects Jacob Slavin to be a big hitter because he doesn't have to be. His stick work is so phenomenally good. But when it comes to having a physical presence on the first line, Walker had 118 hits last year. He actually had more than any Canes defenseman, 2 more than Orlov did. So you put a physical presence up there as well on that line, somebody who's not only, pinching when it comes to the offensive zone, but also making those plays in the defensive zone that will literally separate the puck carrier from the puck by sheer force of impact. You've opened up a whole new possibility for that defensive pairing when it comes to what their impact on the ice would be. So I liked that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching Walker last year. Of course, he was a trade deadline acquisition for the Avalanche. And so for that section of the season, plus the playoffs, I got to watch him. And he had some struggles, but a lot of that had to do with who he was paired with.
Jack Johnson.
Jack Johnson is not the fleetest of foot or the most agile when it comes to defense. In fact, I saw a stat that in the postseason when playing with Johnson, I think he played 80 minutes with Jack Johnson and had a Corsi 4 for only 48%. Yes. But when he played with any other defenseman, any of the other 5, that was 100 minutes of time in the postseason he put in, he had a Corsi 4 of something like 56% or controlled shots, something like that. That was significantly better than before. So you give him halfway decent defender to work with, and he is going to produce really good results for the team on both sides of the ice. He really is a 200-foot defenseman.
Yep.
And that's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the things that folks don't know about Walker, they see him skating, of course. He highlights that whenever he's on the ice, but he is extremely strong in his own zone. Yeah. He's solid. Like he's 5'11", almost 200 pounds. So he's a stocky guy. He can go into the corners. He can make it happen. And I think your hit numbers are right on as well, Aaron. And I think a lot of folks just don't know how good Sean Walker is or could be. And I think this is why the Canes said, we're going to sign him for 5 years. This guy's going to be part of our future. And we really think he's got a lot of upside. And I think that's what's happened the last couple of years. His game has really started to elevate. He's really started to show what he can do. And I love the idea of putting him with Jacob Slavin because then he'd be able to just go and ramble and do what he does best. So, again, and the other thing, too, of course, they would be one of the key shutdown pairs, right? So, again, defensively.
And not only that, that would for sure be 5-on-5. You try and get those matchups against the other team's best lines. But it also translates really well into the penalty kill. Because if they're used to playing together 5-on-5, it's really easy to put them out there as the first pairing on the penalty kill to be quickly followed up by Orlov and Chatfield. Again, making it so that you're not putting quite as much time on ice wear and tear on Burns and letting a pair that's played together already just keep on rolling when the PK rolls around. And you mentioned the contract. One thing I wanted to add is the projection for what Walker was going to get for his free agent contract was $4.5 million.
Yes.
So I think that the Canes getting him for the 3.6 is such a steal. I'm sure the 5 years had a lot to do with it, but especially with the term that they're going to have and the skill set he brings, the Slavin Walker pairing could be a pairing that works very well, not just for this season, but into the future.
And I think Walker might be a little underrated on the PK a little bit because last season in Philadelphia, he had the 3rd most PK ice time on the team but he never had that usage in LA. So people didn't see him with what he could bring to the penalty kill. It just wasn't, they had people ahead of him. They didn't have him out there. He was playing, very short shifts on the penalty kill. So I think, paired with someone like Slavin, he's going to be, have a great impact there too. And it's just going to be another element that he brings. So
he was the best penalty killer for the Avs after he came over in the trade. Yep.
Well, and I think he can play 20 minutes a game, no problem. I don't see any problem with that at all. Back to your comment too, Katie, the 5 years is interesting. I think there are two keys here. One of them is that he really wanted to play for the Hurricanes. I mean, there's no question that, he was right off the bat, once he was signed, the first thing he did was start talking to the coaches. He wanted to get video so he could understand the defensive system. So, I mean, that tells you a little bit about the guy. And again, I think, from the Canes perspective, he's a guy that, at that price, you're golden. You can play him on the second pair, the first pair, the third pair. Who cares? I mean, it's a wonderful deal all around. So I'm excited about Sean Walker. I think he was a quiet signing that a lot of folks didn't really kind of, it didn't hit them that hard because, he was a guy that wasn't as well known. But definitely is on the upswing. And I think the Canes got him just at the right time. And he's going to be a wonderful, wonderful addition for them, for sure. Now, if we go to the second pairing, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about Orlov and Chatfield. So, interesting thing when you start to look at the defense last year, and of course you had the second pairing of Skjei and Pesce, and great guys. But Orlov and Chatfield can be as good or better as a second pairing. They can definitely play the big minutes, and they proved that in the playoffs. But more so, Orlov is a guy that's proven elsewhere that he plays big minutes and he plays well. He has been a plus player for the last 9 straight years. Okay, so this guy, doesn't matter whether he's with Washington, with Boston, with the Canes, it doesn't matter. He's a plus player. And I think that's huge. That tells you how good this player is. Chatfield, I think, is one of the players that's going to see some huge, huge growth over the next year or two. He's a wonderful defenseman. If you watch him every day, you realize just how much talent this guy has. He has a huge ceiling. And, I mean, last year, plus 15. Interesting story, and Katie, you were talking about it. When Chatfield joined our friend Orlov, things changed.
Yeah, well, Orlov obviously struggled at the beginning of last season. It always takes players time to adjust to the Canes system and the way that they do things with their unique defensive structure. And so that was going to be baked into the cake anyway with Orlov. But then you add that his defensive partner at the beginning of the season was Tony DeAngelo. And the two of them just were water and oil. They did not mix. They did not find any kind of chemistry or synergy together. And you could tell. And they got burned quite a bit. The Canes had struggles across the board as a team early in the season, but I think that pairing was one of the most glaring issues that the team had, and eventually forced Coach Rod to make a switch and to make DeAngelo the 7th D and bring Chatfield up to join Orlov. And like they say, the rest after that was history. That pairing was phenomenal. Orlov went from minus double digits to being a plus player by the end of the season. And that is completely due to the kind of play that he was able to find with Chatfield. And that's why that pairing needs to stay together, because unlike Slavin, who can play with anybody and can make anybody look good, including DeAngelo, Orlov is not that player. Orlov has to have somebody that fits with him, and Chatfield is that perfect fit, and they need to stay together, and they will be just as strong as Skjei and Pesce were for the Canes for so many years. We have our second pair, and they need to stay together.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Well, the other thing, it's interesting when you listen to what Orlov said about Chatfield and what Chatfield said about Orlov in a recent interview. Basically, they both said the same thing. once you got used to each other, you really felt comfortable with each other, and you could just know where they were going to go, and you knew what you could do or what you could get away with, and how you could play your game. And, Chatfield is probably one of the best at covering for roving defensemen, as we saw. I mean, how many times did he come back, and his speed alone would allow him to get back and make, wonderful defense plays. And I think Orlov is a guy that likes to roll with the puck. He definitely wants to get up in the offensive zone. He wants to fire it. He wants to get into the offense. And, of course, when he was with Tony D, you got two guys doing that. So who's back taking care of the ranch? That's the problem. But the interesting thing is, I think both of these guys complement themselves very, very well. They're each other in that regard. And I think, again, Chatfield is a guy who started to show some offense. He scored 10 goals last year. He really started to come on. And you remember Tracy with Chatmandu was the echo from Trip, which I thought was fine, but it was coming up frequently because Chatfield really, the second half, started to show his confidence offensively. And I think giving them the second pairing now will give both of these guys the confidence and playing time. Interestingly enough, just a closing point on Orlov. Orlov, he is generally a 20, 21, 22-minute guy per game. And interestingly enough, of course, he was signed to a contract last year at 7.75, but he only played 17 minutes, like 17, 18. So, I mean, you think about this and you're going, wait a minute, that's a bit of a disconnect. If he's getting that much, he should be playing 22, 23, 24 minutes a game. He wants to play that. He can. He's totally capable physically and has the talent to do it. And I think what we're going to see is going to be an interesting situation where this pair is going to bring some things perhaps that the second pair didn't last year. And I believe as you start to look at this question about, is this defense going to be as good as last year's defense core? I think there's a big gain that can be had with the second pairing.
One thing that is interesting, I believe that Chatfield and Orlov, of defensive pairings that had played over 300 minutes together last season, had the best Corsi 4 percentage behind Slavin and Burns, which are driven by Slavin, and Heiskanen and whoever his defensive partner was. His name's not coming to mind right now. So that is phenomenal work by that particular pair. And I just see them getting stronger. There's nowhere to go with them but up. And, there's a case to be made too, that if they have a really strong season, I wouldn't be surprised if the Canes bring Orlov back. Because if that pair's really, really strong again, and there's no reason to believe that they wouldn't be, I don't see why they don't come back to that again for at least another season or two. Probably not at the same price tag, but
no, we know that.
Well, he'd be closer to that price tag if he's playing 20, 21, 22 minutes a game. For sure, he'd be up in the 6 or 7 million range. So it's not that far off. And I totally agree with you on this with Dmitry Orlov because, again, they're going to have cap room. We know that's going to be the situation going into next year. And he's a guy that he's comfortable there. They love him. He's going to be a good guy to have to bring along Nikishin as well. So I think the opportunity to maintain this pairing and continue to grow with these guys is a great one. And I personally am very excited to see them, getting the keys for that second pair. I really was impressed with their play in the playoffs. They didn't miss a beat. And you never were concerned when they were on the ice at all, which to me, that is a great harbinger for what to expect this year in regular play against teams that are much less challenging than some of the playoff teams that they saw, right? So I think they're really gonna shine, and for sure, I love that pairing too. So I think we're in pretty good shape on the top two pairs. Now we get to the third pairing, and it's interesting because here's the veteran Brent Burns. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I found with Burns was that he's a guy that he's important to the team, and there's no question that he's got to be key again this season if the Canes are going to go deep. And so now he's in a different situation alongside a guy in Shayne Gostisbehere. What do we think about this pairing?
I think it's a big, high risk, high reward pairing. This is, I feel super confident in the first two, but this one is one where you have two guys who both love to jump into the play. And so they just would need to find that rhythm to make it work so that they're not both jumping and get caught at the same time. But they're both veterans. They're both very savvy and smart with how they play. So I don't think that should be particularly too much of a problem. And if they can find that cohesion as far as when to read off of each other and who's going to jump, it creates a really big problem for opposing defenses, because which one are you going to cover? It used to be that you knew you had to cover Burns or you knew you had to cover Ghost because they were the offensive D on that pair. Well, now if you have them both there together, you have to play a little bit more honest. You can't cheat one way or the other, which will open up just that much more space for either of them so that Burns' shot's less likely to be blocked, or Ghost has a chance to make a maneuver and get that sweet pass through that he might not have otherwise been able to do. So big risk for sure to make sure that they don't get caught, but lots of potential for big reward, especially if as the third pair, they're not getting the big defensive assignments. And so they can really start to pick apart some of those lower lines for other teams. Really, really intriguing opportunities if that pair is put together.
Yeah, and I think that there's a good chance that some of the effects of their maybe lesser defensive instincts could be mitigated a little bit depending on which forward lines they're out with. And really, there isn't a forward line on the Canes that doesn't have a lot of defense to offer, but you can definitely see which ones are working better, and that would be something they would find out along the way in the early part of the season. And, the other thing is that when you talk about Brent Burns, I mean, he's such a revered veteran. He's not somebody that anybody's, this isn't, we think he's not good anymore. This is the natural effects of aging on a player, the reduced leg speed and all of that. He would probably see a return to some of his previous stats and efficacy because the season before this one, he had 61 points. And this last season, he had 43. The biggest decline was not power play points, surprisingly enough. I know there are some people who would be surprised to hear that because they thought the power play was where he was losing points. No, he was still picking up a lot of points on the power play. He lost points at 5-on-5 because handling the defensive side of that role was taking too much of his effort, too much of his time. There wasn't anything left to really generate the offense that he had before. So you put him, like Katie said, you put him out there against some easier lines and pairings in a third pair defenseman situation, he might easily return to giving more points at 5-on-5 and generating the offense that way. So that would be a good thing for him too.
Well, I mean, if you talk about offensive power, I mean, last year Gostisbehere had 56 points. So, I mean, he really knows how to put the points up. And you talked about over 60 points for Burns 2 years ago. Now, Burns, interestingly enough, in the last 5 years, he is 11th of NHL defensemen in points. Mm-hmm. So 232 points his last 5 years. I mean, that's 45 to 50 points a year. That's a pretty good number. He's definitely a guy that's going to put up points. Gostisbehere can skate. He's a guy that likes to move with the puck as well. Burns, he likes to get the shots. He likes to get in there and make things happen. Of course, I think he's one of the best in the league at getting a puck back at the point and shooting it instantly. Like it's an amazing art that he has. But I think Gostisbehere could be a nice compliment for him. He plays a little bit of a different game, and I think it could work out very, very well. And one of the things that this could do, and I like the idea of putting them on that third pair together, because now you're playing, as you mentioned, Katie, minutes against less defensive squads. So, you're down at the third or the fourth line. you're going to get the minutes against those lines, and that's going to help the Canes offense in general because, again, the D-core is going to have to make a big difference offensively. I think that's something we're going to have to watch for. They were one of the top last year in D points. And again, I think they're going to have to come through again this year with a strong offense, and that combination could really be a part of it.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of potential. Ghost got his 59 points on a team that was not very good last season. And so even with third pairing minutes instead of higher,
yeah,
I don't see why he can't repeat that, especially if he's the one that quarterbacks the power play.
So you have
him and Burns as the two power play guys. You have the other two pairings as the PK specialists. And so it's very balanced across the board. And when you talk first, second, third pairings, most teams, there is a very clear delineation.
Yes.
Minutes wise, as far as who's on those particular lines. I think that difference would end up has been and will end up being more subtle, especially if these are the pairings that the team goes with. And then you just don't get as much wear and tear. We talk about the wear and tear on Burns. We definitely don't want that. We want to give him every opportunity to keep his Ironman streak alive and to not be burned out by the end of the season. But there's also something to be said for not putting too much wear and tear on Slavin.
Mm-hmm.
We need our best defensive defenseman to be fresh come playoff time. And so this particular arrangement of defensemen really has so much balance to it and gives the Carolina Hurricanes a really good opportunity to have a strong push into the playoffs come the end of the season.
And just to piggyback off your point there about Burns keeping him fresh and then the importance of that. I took a look at the last 10 seasons. On average, there have been 5 entire players. We're talking forwards, defensemen, or goalies, age 39 and up. Out of 736 roster spots in the NHL and about 1,000 players a year that play, you have 5 who are 39 and older. So the team has to know what comes along with that territory. They're watching that very carefully. Like Tom said, his minutes have already come down. So, the goal should be to have the best Brent Burns you can have when they hit the playoffs. That should be the overwhelming goal. So in the regular season, if he doesn't play the heavy minutes, you're much more likely to get that version of Brent Burns, and we want that. So
and if you look at Gostisbehere, as the complement to Burns, his average ice time is 20 minutes a game in his career. So this guy can play minutes. He's definitely a guy that has played tough minutes too. So I mean, he can handle that quite nicely. And again, he's got an average of 48 points a year. So this guy's a talented defenseman. A lot of folks, again, don't know a lot about Ghost, but he's a heck of a defenseman. He had a 65-point year with Philadelphia. Of course, he had a big year last year with Detroit. So he's a guy that can really get it done. And so if you put them together, I think you've got another interesting potential here, which is if injuries come, both of these guys can move up quite nicely in the lineup.
Absolutely.
Not a concern. They're not going to miss a beat. They're both solid defensemen. They're both able to move up, similar to what we had last year with, of course, Orlov and Chatfield. Now you've got Burns and you've got Gostisbehere. You got a couple of guys that can jump up.
You almost have the balance to what Rod always says about his forward lines. We don't number the lines. I mean, we all know who the first line is, but the other lines are often used interchangeably. And you could have the same thing where we know who the first pairing is, but you have really 2 second pairings. You don't have a third pairing. You don't have a pairing that has to be sheltered and played for 15 minutes at maximum. We don't have that in Carolina, and that's one of the reasons why the Carolina defensive core has always been so good.
In a lot of ways, circumstance would dictate usage, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you have an offensive zone face-off, you want Burns and Gostisbehere out there,
right?
Because you win the face-off back to them, and they're going to start creating right away. You have a defensive zone face-off. Go ahead and go for Orlov and Chatfield because you know that they're going to be bulldogs on that puck and go after it. And without a doubt, Slavin and Walker, you can use them wherever.
For sure.
But that, like Aaron said, that is a really nice balance to have. And if with it working more like having 2 second pairs, the options would be so varied for Rod to use according to game situation.
Yeah, and all the defensemen again they played big minutes. I mean, I just mentioned Ghost is over 20 minutes in his career. I mean, Burns is over 22 minutes in his career. And again, same thing with Orlov. And so Chatfield is catching up very fast, and he deserves to play big minutes because he's earned the right. And Walker as well. He played big minutes with Philadelphia last year and was outstanding. So I think the Canes have built a top 6. And that's really where I wanted to go with all of this. When you start talking about, this defensive core, they built a top 6 that is outstanding. These guys can be really, really something to watch. And I think can certainly stand up to the group we had last year. Now, I know, Katie, you did a little bit of work on looking at some of the players we had last year and some of the new players. Any comments in that regard?
Well, if you just take it kind of at a 1-for-1, Pesce was a right-handed defenseman, and we replaced him with Walker. So if you look at the J Fresh cards, that's just one particular reference point that you can use. You see that they match up really well. It does look like Pesce is better statistically defensively than Walker, but Walker is much stronger than Pesce offensively, no surprise. Pesce was a penalty killer. Walker's a penalty killer. They really complement each other a lot of ways. And part of the question then becomes, with the big difference being that Pesce's more highly rated defensively, how much of that is growing up and playing in the Canes system?
Right.
Because Walker just has not, whether it was LA, Philadelphia, or Colorado, has not had the quality of defensive partners nor the quality of system to play in that Pesce had. So I would not be surprised if Walker's defensive metrics, especially if he's paired with Slavin, if they wouldn't jump up and be something that would match or even perhaps exceed Pesce, because Pesce has gotten a little bit slower and not quite as crisp on his defense as he has been in the past. Plus, Pesce has been very injury prone. And Walker, to me, from what I have seen from him, is quite hardy. I mean, the hits that he throws around just tells you that he can dish it out and he can take it and keep on trucking. So with those two, I think that at the very least you're getting an even swap in player. And depending on how the offense works out with Walker, it could end up being an exchange in the Canes' favor. Yeah. Conversely, you look at Skjei and Gostisbehere, our 2 left-handed defensemen swap. Yes. And both of them are high offense players. Skjei scored a ton for us, especially 5v5. He was trusted enough even to be on that second power play unit, and he was great. And when he worked with Pesce, they were a good, strong shutdown as well. So you have a similar sort of thing with their stat cards when you compare side by side. They both produce offensively, but at least on the surface, Ghost's defense is not as strong as Skjei's. Right. You go back and you make that same argument. Look who Ghost was playing for last year. He was playing for Detroit. They were not a strong defensive team. They gave up a lot. And so you put Ghost on a team like the Canes that have a much stronger system, and I think you will see his defensive metrics go up. If you look at his J Fresh cards from before he was traded to the Canes a couple years ago to after that season with the Canes when he signed with Detroit to now, it goes like this. He was low, and then with the Canes he got better defensively, and then with Detroit he got better defensively. He's back with the Canes now. I'm expecting that defense to tick back up in the right direction, no matter who he ends up playing with as a partner. Just being on the Canes is going to make a big difference for him. And the other thing to look at, one of the stats that gets overlooked on those J Fresh cards is quality of teammates. It's in the red for both Walker and Ghost, and it's in the blue for Skjei and Pesce. So again, you surround them with better players and you let them open up their game a little bit more and play to their identity. And I think that we have a really nice swap on our hands that we are going to be saying Pesce who, Shea who, about a month or two into the season once those two hit their stride. That's definitely my hope and also my expectation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Wizard only makes great moves, right? So Eric Tulsky, I'm a big fan of Eric's, and I think he's gone out and one of the things that Gostisbehere said that he was really excited about the Hurricanes because they came to him first. They were the first ones to go to him when free agency started, and he really loved that about them. And I took that as, again, Eric Tulsky makes decisions based on a huge amount of data. They analyze everything right to the limit type thing. And if he feels like, Gostisbehere and Walker are going to be the right kind of players, he said that very clearly in his comments, then we have to expect they're going to fit in the system extremely well. And both can skate, both can move the puck, which is one of the big things they look for from the Blue. In fact, both of those guys are going to bring more of that than the Skjei and Pesce guys. Certainly Skjei had some offense, but he wasn't a quick guy up the ice. He wasn't he wasn't a fancy player going up the ice, and certainly Pesce, much more defensively oriented, as we know. So I think there's a case to say that this is really going to be a huge uptick to the offensive side. So, I guess having looked at these pairs, getting excited about them and the combination, when we look like just in the cold light of day, this defense versus last year's defense. And as I mentioned at the kickoff, a lot of folks are feeling like the loss of Skjei and Pesce, how could we let them go? Mm-hmm. And you replace them with Gostisbehere and Walker. What do we think?
I think that's taking a pretty negative view of the situation. I think it's understandable that fans are going to look at it that way. You get used to certain players and what they bring, and you've only seen glimpses of other players, or you've only heard things from other fans, and you don't really know how to evaluate what's going to happen or what's going on. But the bottom line is that the Canes have something that no other team has, and that is Rod Brind'amour. His coaching, his systems, he knows what he's doing with his players. He's not going to leave anybody in the lurch. I have had the thought myself that one of the things we're not going to see until later in the season, and we're only going to see it again, like anybody who's not watching their own team. We will see how Skjei and Pesce do without each other and without the Canes system. I wish them the best. I certainly am not sitting here looking at it going, well, they're not going to be good. But we don't. It's not a foregone conclusion. We've all seen, solid forward lines get split up and go to other teams, and then they never have that same impact. And it's the same thing for defensive pairs. When a defensive pair splits up and the partners go off to different teams, and they just never seem to find that same level. So, I think that Skjei and Pesce will both do well. I don't know that they will do as well as they did in Carolina. And, I think that that's something that we just look and see how these new guys are going to do, because these are our guys now. So let's support them and see how they do.
Absolutely. I just expect every time I turned on a Canes game, I always felt a whole lot more peace than when I watched other games, because I just knew the defense was going to be there, that it was going to be solid, and they weren't going to give me a heart attack on a regular basis watching what was going on in the game. And I don't see that being any different this year. This is just going to be a team is like, oh, the puck's in our zone. Okay, well, our guys are just going to go get it and get it out and turn it back up, and hunky dory. Nothing to stress out about too much. Like I said, they were one of the top teams in the league when it came to high danger chances against, and if not the top team in the league, one of the top with shots against, period. And you don't have shots against if you don't have that kind of a stat if you don't have a really, really good defense. And there's just that it's not enough of a change to be worried about. This team defense is going to be phenomenal again this year. Well,
the other thing that's going to help it, I think, is the goaltending, because again, this year you've got Freddie back; he's healthy, but you've also got Piotr ready to take the next step. And I know, Katie, you're expecting a huge season out of Piotr. I believe that's going to be the other piece of this. At the end of the day, and I think you hit it right on, Aaron, it's a team game, okay? Mm-hmm. And there's nobody that gets the team side of it more than Rod Brind'amour. He absolutely is magic with that. That's why the Canes have been in the playoffs 6 years in a row and deep several times. I mean, you just have to look at that. And it's been with different players, right? Mm-hmm. He's had a number of different players through that period. And it didn't matter who put the uniform on. And I think this is part of what the Canes have been trying to do is they've been trying to find character players that have a certain, capability, both defensively and offensively, to fit that system. And that's part of the magic of Tulsky and Darren York and the rest of the crew. So I give them a lot of credit. And I fully expect this defensive core to be right up there, certainly, again, for the Canes. And interestingly enough, one of the questions that a lot of folks have been asking is, okay, what if we have injuries? What are we going to do with this D-core? And the Canes have gone out and they picked up some players. And again, folks with some experience. They got, Riley Stillman, who had played with Vancouver and with Buffalo. He's got some experience. He's a solid stay-at-home guy. Of course, his dad was a Stanley Cup winner with the Canes. And you've got, Ty Smith, who came over in the deal with Pittsburgh when they got Gensel. He was kind of an afterthought. Nobody really heard much about Ty. But, Ty was a high first-round pick. And he's a guy that when he was drafted, the word on him was this guy is something else. So, he's kind of struggled in his game a little bit, but you never know what the Canes can do. It'd be in Chicago and a chance to really find himself. And then you wrap it up with a veteran again, Joakim Ryan, who is a right shot D. He had been up with the Canes previously for a few games. And, of course, had played quite a bit with San Jose before he headed over to Europe and played in Sweden. So, these guys are solid guys. They can come in. They can play some hockey for you. And so I think, again, the Canes are not kind of outside without any kind of options if they have injuries. They've got guys that have been there before, solid defensemen who can step in. And I know that not far down the road, of course, the Canes have some more help coming.
They have Alexander Nikishin, which is, everyone wants to talk about Nikishin, and they should, because he's going to be such an impact on the team. They also have Scott Morrow, and he's been practicing with the team and getting ready for all the, all the different things that they have coming up. I know that he's not likely to see a lot of ice time in Raleigh this year, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was going to get a call up. So,
Yeah, of course, and to mention Morrow, he wants to play for the Hurricanes.
Oh,
so he's going to go down to Chicago. That's a great plan. Help him make the transition to pro. But he's going to want to be up with the Canes as quickly as possible. And this guy is a real talent, of course. Mm-hmm. And about another guy that I love is Charles Alexis Legault. He's going to be in Chicago. He came out of Quinnipiac. He's a guy that's going to surprise a lot of folks. This is a big player. Solid guy in the blue line. Started to see his offense come on strong the last few years in college. A big, big win for the Canes in drafting him, I think. So, they've got some really wonderful young players that are going to be not far behind and all of them could possibly see action this season. So, when you look at the D-core, it starts to get fun. But then, you take a look, and last year I mentioned that, the Canes were in the top three at the start of the season. The Athletic had the Canes number 1 and they had Colorado number 2. And I thought, it'd be kind of fun to look at the teams again and what we think. And again, the Canes, I think, are right there.
The Canes defense, I'd be surprised if it isn't the top defense or one of the top defenses. It just depends on how you rank defense. Obviously, I'm also a fan of the Colorado Avalanche. You mentioned one of the top defenses. And the thing is that the Colorado Avalanche took a little bit of a step backwards last year on the defensive side of the puck, but amped things up on the offensive side of the puck. So when you talk about the Avs being one of the best defenses, it's because when you average out the offense and the defense, it comes out to a nice number. I want to say that the Avs scored or had something like 30 more points than any other defense in the league last year, somewhere around there. It just is a defense that thrives on creating offense. And now that Jack Johnson is no longer with the team, they have added Kane's familiar face, Calvin DeHaan, as well as former Calgary Flames Oliver Shillington and former Ottawa Senators Eric Brandstrom. Correct. So those three are not going to do anything that is going to harm the team as much as Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson served his purpose. He came in, he helped them win their Stanley Cup. You can make an argument that without Jack Johnson that year, the Avs don't win the Stanley Cup because Sam Girard was knocked out. So you got to have guys like that. Like you mentioned, the Canes have them. The Canes have those pieces that can step in if a key guy gets hurt. And that's what Jack Johnson was. But it's just come time for the Avs to move on. And so with DeHaan being that steady defensive presence there, and then Shillington and Brandstrom being the great transition guys that they have the potential to be, it's going to be another high-scoring defense. Where they go on the defensive side of the puck, I think the Canes are going to be so much better than the Avs on that particular aspect of the game. Like I mentioned before, when I watch the Canes game, I don't have heart attacks. I'm just, my blood pressure is good with the Canes game because I know the defense and the goaltending has got our back. On the Avs side, the defense and the goaltending sometimes gives me a little bit of a panic because they're high intensity for good or for bad. They are high intensity. And so that's just the biggest difference. Both teams are going to be excellent defensively. I talk about the Avs giving me a heart attack, but there's 30 other teams out there that wish they had the Avs defense.
Oh, absolutely.
The Hurricanes being probably the only team that's like, yeah, you got Pale McCarr, you got Devon Taves, but we're sitting pretty too. We're doing just fine.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting. I did a quick calculation on some metrics just to see how they might compare. If you look at points by defenseman, what I did was use the current roster with their points from last year. So all the players that have moved into these teams, I grabbed their points and tried to come up with some kind of a sense out of it. For points by defenseman, Colorado had 213, Carolina 213. So that's kind of interesting, right? On plus minus, Colorado plus 50, the Hurricanes plus 54. Okay, so again, very close.
Closer than I would have thought.
Yeah, very close. Okay.
So shots on goal by defenseman, Colorado had 719, the Canes 844. So, but the Canes love to shoot, right? So
that's the strategy.
So that's the other thing. And then and you've got hits. Again, very close. Colorado at 540, the Canes at 517. Mm-hmm. So you're flipping coins here. It's really close, obviously. A little bit of an edge on the shots for the Canes. But on the block shots, a little bit of an edge for the Avalanche. 659 to 535 for the Hurricanes. So
the Canes don't block shots that much. That was when I was looking at stats, that really surprised me. And it just goes to show, being the top defense and you're not blocking shots, you're doing something else right.
Yeah,
and they keep the shot numbers down, right? I think the Canes are usually among the top teams for the lowest shots against. Yeah. So again, these numbers are a little bit skewed because if they're not getting as many shots, you can't block as many shots. So it's kind of tough, right? But if you look at that on the defenses just matching up to each other, and yes, you've got McCarr and you've got Devon Taves, but the Hurricanes, they've got a balanced group. And I think that's the difference. If you look at the 6 of the Hurricanes against the 6 of the Avalanche, it gets interesting. And I went through a similar analysis at the start of last year. And the big advantage, of course, was the fact that, of course, Colorado had Jack Johnson. So that was the advantage for the Canes. The third pass was not even close.
No.
It's interesting. You talk about the hits being so close, but one of the players that had a lot of hits for the Avs last year was Walker. Now he's a Kane. So, that might skew it a little bit in advantage of the Canes this year.
For sure. And, again, I think, we've gone through a lot today. We've analyzed several different parts of this puzzle. Clearly, different type of defense for the Hurricanes, bringing in more offense for sure, bringing in folks who can really move the puck up the ice quickly. And I think in the Canes situation this year, where the offense is going to come more from the blue, certainly creating it, I think that was a smart move. And, I think they're going to be given every opportunity to make that happen. And again, I think they're going to be right up there, as the top defensive crew in the league. I wouldn't be surprised if they're right at the top because they are so well balanced, and it's going to be exciting. But who knows? I guess we'll find out at the end of the year.
Just to your point there, Tom. People keep talking about how last year's defense, they were so good, and this year's is not going to measure up at all. And they're looking at various things like we've talked about. But I keep remembering that it was the 22-23 team that reached the Eastern Conference Final, and that defensive core was not even anywhere near as good on paper as either of these two. It goes back to the old hockey maxim that the games aren't played on paper. So we don't know, because we don't know how these pairings are going to, maybe Rod really will want to have Slavin and Burns together. We'll see how it all shakes out. But the point is that we don't really know. But what we do know is that this team has been to the playoffs 6 years in a row. And, they have had some success there. It's exciting to see how far they're going to get this year.
For sure.
Very true. Yep.
So I think, we've covered it from front to back, and I feel very comfortable with where the Canes are. Obviously, there's some more discussion as we continue the season preview content that we've been working on, and I'm sure we'll get into some more content very, very soon, and continue to take a look at this team and how we feel the Canes are going to do this coming season. As we go through this, it's getting more and more exciting, of course. We're seeing the players are coming to town. They're starting to work out together. You're starting to see the Canes come together as a team that we'll be excited about for sure again this season. And, going to be a lot of fun. I'm sure we'll be back soon. Please, as always, it's been a riot.
So much fun.
Yes.
And,
great time.
So we'll look forward to catching up soon and continuing our discussion about this exciting Carolina Hurricanes team for the upcoming season.
So close. Can't you taste it? Can't you? I'm so ready.
Sure can.
As always, great to talk hockey with Aaron and Katie. We'll be getting together soon as we continue our preseason review for the Carolina Hurricanes. If you have comments, please place those down below and we'll respond just as quickly as we can. If you like this episode, please press the like button. And if you'd like to be alerted of future episodes, please subscribe. As always, thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to getting together real soon, right here on Storm Tracker.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes you need. Storm Tracker.